Oh yay, another Athlon scope. This time I bought this one with my own money. It went on super sale one day and I said, you know what? I love 4-16 magnified scopes. Let me buy this and see what it's all about. If you didn't know that I love 4-16s, well, guess what? I love 4-16s. I think they're an extremely versatile magnification range that is still fairly small as far as a 4x multiplier, meaning that the glass usually isn't that stressed, and as a result you typically can get a really good performing scope glass-wise for not that much money. Hell, the $130 scope that I reviewed not too long ago, that thing was pretty damn impressive for 4-16 for the price point. Anyway, I digress. This Midas TAC HD 4-16 by 44 comes in around the $500 to $600 price point, but it has significantly fewer features than something of, let's say, the Helos BTR Gen 2 4-20 variety. And that leaves me with a question. Is this or the Helos BTR Gen 2 4-20 a better purchase if you were to keep it in the Athlon family? Well, there's only one way to find out, folks, so why don't you come on in and let's take a closer look at this thing real quick.
The box is typical Athlon. Nice, thick cardboard, well illustrated, with a good amount of information on the outside, and on the inside, there's a couple pieces of nice foam that keep the scope and all of its components nice and neatly set up on the inside. Once the scope is out of the box, you can see that this is a very simple looking optic. It is a little bit on the longer side, but I find that longer scopes sometimes perform a little bit better than shorter scopes. Talking about you, Vector Continental ED 1:8 in second focal plane, that is a perfect example of a scope that performs way better than every other second focal plane 1:8, probably because it's only a little bit longer. Starting at the back with the fast focus eyepiece, the splines they have on the outside are a good texture. They're coarse enough where you can get a good solid purchase, but not so much so that you're going to cut your hand if you were to grab it the wrong way. As far as play on the eyepiece, there is little to none. It felt rock solid to me. The threads are very smooth and very fine, and I found it very easy to adjust. As for the magnification ring, 4 o'clock is at 12, and 16 is just shy of 6, so just shy of 180 degree sweep. There is that little thumb ramp that is included, and I feel for me and my uses, the thumb ramp is more than sufficient for what I will need on this optic. I actually think that if this had a larger throw lever on there, it would get in the way, and maybe we'll talk about that momentarily. As far as the side parallax, it goes down to a minimum of 10 yards, out to infinity, just shy of 270 degrees, which is very, very nice. I like having a finite adjustment to the parallax, especially when the scope has a very shallow depth of field. It allows you to fine tune it a little bit easier than having something with a really short throw and constantly having to hunt for it. What you see me doing is trying to figure out what the sound that the side parallax is making on the inside of the scope, and I'm going to let you listen to it.
No idea what is inside making that click, but there is something inside making a click.
I'm happy to note that after using this thing for a long time, it hasn't been an issue. So I'm just going to keep running it until it becomes an issue. As far as the turrets on this thing, they are exceptional. We'll go in much greater detail on the elevation soon, but just listen to the windage on this thing.
Really good sound and feel to this.
All joking aside, the turrets on this thing are exceptional. Unfortunately, they're still using the very short screw to hold the cap onto the erector, but I don't think they're ever going to change it. As far as the inner workings, you could see the zero stop is right there. A very simple setup. Loosen those set screws, drop it down, rotate it clockwise, tighten it up, and you are good to go. This is an extremely simple optic, and that's part of the reasons why I gravitated towards it. I'm okay with having an exposed elevation turret as long as there's at least a zero stop in it. But let's see how well this thing performs. The APRS2 reticle is way too long of a name for a reticle. I'm sorry. It's just overly complicated for what is essentially a very simple, bare bones milling reticle. There's not a lot going on with this. Again, part of the reason why I like it so much. It's very easy to spot and it's very easy to read. Even here at 4x, the center does look a little bit on the finer side, but the posts at 3, 6, 9, and 12 definitely draw your eye more towards the center. Bringing in the magnification all the way up to its maximum, we don't have any sort of darkening issues or anything of the like. The reticle is nice, sharp, and clear with a very fine center dot and very easy to read milling marks. It is a very simple and very effective reticle. I fell in love with these turrets. So much so that I don't know of other turrets that feel or sound this good for this price point. Let's see how well this thing tracks. Right off the bat, the reticle lines up to my target absolutely flawless. There is zero slop to the windage or the elevation. 4 mils over and 4 mils up, it is bang on perfect. The windage resets flawlessly and we climb up to exactly 10 full mils. Just to make sure that it's actually true, I give it a real good quick wiggle and you can see it returns to zero flawlessly. This is one of the best tracking performances I've ever recorded. I said in the very beginning of this video that these were normally in the mid to like high 500s, and they were when I first bought it. When I bought it though, it was on super sale and it was like low to mid threes. Absolute bargain if you ask me. But right now EuroOptic has these listed for $390. I don't know if they're just coming down in price overall or they're trying to blow out their inventory. Whatever the case may be, these things have definitely come down in price, or at least you could find them for cheaper than what they would normally go for. At 81 yards at 16x, we have a wonderful, sharp, clear, and bright looking image. Colors on this thing are very accurate, and there's no real optical imperfections that I can see. Shifting the camera side to side off center yields a very high level of stability. The reticle and the image maintain a very high level of sharpness up until you can't look past it anymore. Bringing it down to 10x at this thing's mid-range point, you will see that we get the exact same level of performance. Side to side doesn't seem as open as it might be in some other scopes, but I assure you this thing compared to more elaborate 10x's still performs right on par with everything else. Bringing it all the way down to its minimum at 4x, shifting it side to side will yield quite a very large view looking through this thing. It really is impressive to get behind, and that's partly due to the fact that it's got an 11.1 millimeter exit pupil at 4x. However, at the top end, it's only 1.8 millimeter, which is a little bit lacking. Dynamically speaking, at 4x, you can dance around this thing. The eye relief is around 3.7 inches, which is pretty far, and that just plays into just how forgiving this thing is at 4x. It really is very nice. The reticle is a little bit harder to see towards the center, but I assure you it could be much, much worse. At 10x, you could see that there is a significant difference to the exit pupil. It definitely shrinks down quite considerably, but it's still very usable and on par with other 10x scopes. Most notably would be the SWFA 10x, whether it be the Gen 1 or the Gen 2. 16x is going to yield the tightest result of the bunch, and rightfully so. It's the highest magnification. And at 1.8 millimeters or so claimed, it is very, very small. To put that into retrospect, if we were to look at the Nightforce ATACR 4-20, it has a minimum exit pupil of 2.5 millimeters at 20x. In fact, all the other scopes that I'm going to be comparing this thing to momentarily are well above 2 millimeters at their maximum. So a much different performance. How does that translate to low light environment testing? Well, at 4x, you can see already it looks like the image has a little bit of darkening going on to it. Keep in mind this scope is made in China and it might not have the best coatings in the world. Coatings are what really make the difference when it comes to low light performance. And as you will see here, as we slowly increase the magnification to its maximum, it gets very dark up top. The outside edge definitely starts to darken up, and part of the reason is, again, that small exit pupil. 1.8 millimeters is just, it's so small. In fact, looking down my list of MPVOs, it is the smallest exit pupil I have recorded, and it shows. Happily, I'll never really use this thing at 16x unless I'm at a perfect, beautiful square range and I'm going to be on a bench. I'm going to keep it between 4 to 10x for my purposes. To really test the capacity of an optic, we must push it out to extreme distances. Focusing on this 500-yard solar panel, I adjust the side parallax to roughly where it should be on the dial. The reason why I do that first and foremost is to see when I bring it up to its maximum magnification if it's going to line up and be in focus. Very simple to understand that. And when I crank this thing up to its maximum, it is quite sharp and clear. I do adjust it a little bit, but ultimately the initial image is very high. There is a tiny touch of purple fringing on the high contrast areas on the center part of that solar panel, and it's unfortunate, but a lot of these low to mid tier optics will suffer a little bit from that. Pulling the magnification out to 10x and you can see the image sharpens up and brightens up just a little bit. Also, that purple fringing looks to disappear for most of it, but again, it's just because we're not as zoomed in. On the 7-ish to 800-ish yard power tower, you can see that there is a little bit more of that purple fringing on the inside edge of that solar panel. Everything else is sharp and clear, and the depth of field on this thing is extremely large and forgiving. Those power lines that are strung between these towers have, from the far right one at 3 o'clock all the way to the far back one, a difference of about 500 yards between the two. And here at 16x, they're all razor sharp to one another. Bringing it back to 10x before we bring it over to the 1,000-yard solar panel and take a much closer look at that. At 10x, this thing really is quite beautiful. You could see the mirage in the air. This was a very hot summer day, and we had wonderful conditions. Intermittent clouds, but not so thick that it really darkened up the area and changed my white balance. I hate it when that happens, but unfortunately, you can't avoid that sometimes. With 0 mils of added elevation at 1,000 yards, this thing has wonderful looking glass. And that's even with the small exit pupil. As long as you have a really good cheek weld and you're in a very stable position, using this thing at 16x is not going to be an issue unless you're in a lower light environment. Happily, however, you can just dial back the magnification, but it kind of sort of sucks if you can't use the full maximum magnification range on your optic. With this, it's definitely going to cater more towards using it in perfect environments like this. Bringing it up 10 mils and bringing it back to its maximum magnification, you can see the image darkened up a little bit. And that is because that tiny 1.8 millimeter exit pupil shifted when we adjusted the elevation. Happily, however, the image is still razor sharp and clear. The only thing that we lost a little bit of brightness, but adjusting your cheek on your rifle will be a much easier transition than me having to shift my camera up and down. I'm just very happy to see that there is no loss of sharpness or colors or contrast with added elevation. That is very nice. Considering that I'm probably going to throw this on a 22LR, I'll be dialing out for elevation quite frequently. Looking out past the horizon, those farthest power towers are around 2,000 yards away. You can still count how many cables are out at that distance with heavy mirage. Optically, this thing is capable of a wonderful looking image. It's just understanding what its real limitations are. And it's usually going to be in the lower light environments. Finally, let's get into some side-by-side comparisons. On the left will be the Midas, and we're going to start out with the Arken SH4 4-16x50. This is a $300 Chinese-made rifle scope that has actually many of the same great features as the Midas, minus the fact that it's got illumination. It's got a 34mm tube, and it's got exposed, non-locking windage turrets, as opposed to the Midas, which at least has a capped windage. Thank you very much, Athlon. As far as the raw numbers on these two scopes, lengthwise, you have a pretty significant difference. I said earlier that the Midas is a little bit on the longer side, and that's very true. 14.6 inches versus 12.8. That is substantial. But so is the weight difference. This Midas TAC comes in just shy of 24 ounces, whereas the Arken comes in at 35.6. Field of view, again, is going to be a little bit different only because the view through the Arken is much larger. So we have 30 feet to 7.5 with the SH4, with the Midas 27 to 7. Is that going to make a huge difference? It's about 10%, and 10% does add up. However, I'd much rather have a slightly lighter scope that has a little bit better performing overall setup, and for me, that's going to be the Midas. As far as the exit pupil goes, though, guess what? The SH4 is going to be bigger by at least another 10%, 12.5 millimeter to 11.1. And on the top end, the Midas we already know is 1.8, or at least that's what Athlon tells us. As far as the Arken, 3.1 millimeter. That's 75% larger than what the Midas can produce. That is absolutely humongous. Eye relief is basically the same at 3.6 and 3.7 inches. Now, I'm actually doing this side-by-side comparison first by choice. You see, the SH4 is the perfect example of a 4-16 by 50 that sounds similar to the Midas TAC, but isn't similar at all. When you start really looking at these numbers, especially the weight, it really starts to play into the Midas's strong suit. It is fairly light, albeit very long, but I feel like the optical performance of it is extremely high. The SH4 does come with a little bit more features to it, and if that's something that you're interested in, then I'm not going to be able to steer you away from that. It also should be to no surprise that Arken usually puts an amazing sale on most of their product lines. In fact, as the time of filming this, we're just shy of Black Friday, and their deals are pretty substantial. However, I would give it to the Midas for its overall optical clarity and its tracking performance. But the SH4 is still a very good optic. It's just much chunkier and much heavier. I would absolutely throw the SH4 on more of a tactical rifle and the Midas on more of an in-between rifle. Next up is a much more similarly spec'd 4-16. This time it's the Primary Arms SLX. These are both 4-16 by 44s. They both feature 30mm tubes. The SLX is around $300. It's a little bit less expensive than the Midas is currently going for right now. Lengthwise, though, they're very similar. The SLX is 14.25 versus 14.6. And the weight, well, the SLX is a little bit heavier, but it does have a few more features, so that explains that. It's only about 1.5 ounces heavier. The field of view goes to the Midas. The SLX has a slightly smaller field of view, only by 1 foot at the minimum magnification and 0.5 foot at the highest magnification. Exit pupil, again at 4x, they're both very similar, but on 16x, the SLX really pulls ahead, going from 1.8 with the Midas to 2.75 with the SLX. Eye relief is basically exactly the same. Price point on these are going to be, right now, about $90 different between these two. Primary Arms is a good company to deal with. I've been dealing with them for years, and I really do like the SLX 4-16. I think it's a very good optic. It really impressed me with how it performed optically, but there were a couple things about it that I didn't really particularly care for. The MIL, it's a MIL 2R, MIL 2GB, whatever reticle. It's the same reticle that's actually in my GLX 4-16, which I didn't really get good footage for. That's a topic for another time. But the SLX optically is very impressive. The reticle definitely leaves some to be desired, but overall as a package, especially if you like Primary Arms or if you get a good discount from Primary Arms, it's a really compelling package, especially considering it's got illumination that is actually quite good. Now, for my use point, both of these would have been fine, but I bought the Midas to try out on my own, and the SLX was lent in to me by a viewer, so that's the only reason why I'm going with the Midas. Would I have put the SLX on the rifle that I plan on putting it on? Yes, I would have. I really like the SLX. The reticle might not be my favorite, but it's easy enough to pick up the center at lower magnifications, especially with the illumination, which would be very important for me and my uses for the rifle that I'm putting it on. But we'll talk about that more momentarily. At 300 yards, both of these scopes perform wonderfully. Again, the illumination is a very nice touch with the SLX, but with the Midas, would I really be happy if it had it? Probably not, because it would only make it that much more expensive. I actually really like how simple and bare bones the Midas is. You only have 3 things to adjust: magnification, elevation, and parallax. And sometimes less really is more. Let's show some brotherly love. Midas versus Helos. 4-16 versus 4-20. The price point between these two right now, the Helos is about $150 more, give or take. And it doesn't sound like that much money when you factor in what the Helos has to offer as opposed to the Midas. You have 4x more magnification, you have locking windage and elevation turrets, and you have illumination. And you also have a reticle that's a little bit more overall usable, given that it's a dropped Christmas tree style reticle, whereas the Midas is a very standard milling reticle. As far as the overall length, the Helos is an inch or so shorter. It weighs about 4 ounces heavier. Its overall field of view at the minimum is exactly the same. And at the top end, well, no surprise there, the Helos is only 5.6 feet versus the Midas is 7 feet, and that's completely due to the fact that there's 4x difference between these two at the top end. I could not find an exit pupil size for the Helos, so just take it for what it is. But you have to ask yourself this question, ladies and gentlemen. Is 4x really that much of a difference up at the top end? Look at these two side by side. They're both at their maximums. Yes, the Helos looks pretty good, but the Midas definitely has a much sharper looking image. The reticle on the Helos at 20x is much nicer to my eye. It's easier to pick up without being too obtrusive, but both of them, as far as reticles go, I feel perform quite well. The view through both of these is very similar, but the Midas is slightly bigger, and the scope profile is about the same on both of them. Now, I will give the edge to the Midas when they're both at their maximum, but if we pull out the Helos to a little bit less magnification, right now we're roughly at 10x, the image does look much better. If you want to see how well the Helos performs overall, go watch my review of it. It's another good optic. That's in the 4-20 range. It's just going to be a little bit chunkier, but it's going to be shorter, a little bit heavier, but it's going to have much more features as opposed to what the Midas has. Again, it's going to be completely down to your personal preference. Would I run the Helos? Yes, I would, but not on the gun that I'm using it on because, again, I'm not going to need that much magnification because it's only on a 22. I also prefer the depth of field on the Midas, whereas the Helos definitely has a much shallower depth of field. However, backing out the Helos to 16x, and both of them have very comparable images. And again, because the Helos has illumination, when you start getting into the shadowy areas out at 300 yards, it really does help have the reticle stand out on your target. It's one of those things, some people would much rather have it than not need it, than need it and not have it. And I completely understand and respect that. The good thing is, if I don't like the Midas, I can always throw the Helos on because Athlon did send me the Helos to keep. But again, I'm going to save that probably for another project later on down the road. For right now, the Midas is going to be the one I'm going to choose, and we'll go much more in depth on that very soon. For this next and last comparison, you're probably going to ask me to go get a CAT scan in the morning. Because how could I really be putting the Midas up against an ATACR and actually mean it? I'm serious here. How could I put these two side by side and say, hey, listen, they're actually pretty freaking close? It goes like this. The ATACR is $2,500. It's 2 inches shorter. It weighs about 5.5 ounces heavier. It does have a little bit smaller field of view, believe it or not. 26.9 to 27.7 and 6.9 to 7. And its exit pupil is a little bit smaller at 4x, 10.3 to 11.1. But again, at 16x, the ATACR has a 2.7 millimeter exit pupil to 1.8. Eye relief is within 0.2, 3.5 for the ATACR, 3.7 for the Midas. So C, how the hell can you say that these two are fairly comparable? It's the overall experience behind them. Optically, the Midas is very impressive. The ATACR is still one of, if not my favorite overall scope packages. It still sends shivers down my spine thinking about using it and running it and how much I adored the thing. But it's $2,500. But let's say you already have an ATACR 4-16 on a precision gun or an SBR, whatever, and you're looking to build a trainer. If you have the money to run a trainer with another ATACR, then God bless you. You have way more money than me, and you're bowler as not going to curse. I'm going to try not to curse. But let's say you want to build a trainer on a budget. The Midas TAC HD 4-16x44 is very similar in many ways to the ATACR. Optically, yes, the ATACR is better, but the Midas is not that far behind. The reticles here are both very simple and similar. They're standard milling reticles, at least with the Mil-R reticle found in the ATACR. Both of them track flawlessly. Both of them have wonderfully simple controls, all things considered. And the Midas can be had for much less money. So if you want to build a cheap 22LR trainer, something like the Midas TAC would be a perfect complement to the Nightforce ATACR 4-16x42. Yes, I am aware that I just compared a $390 Chinese-made scope to one of the best American-made scopes, in my opinion. But if I had an ATACR 4-16, which I do plan on getting one of these days, I just really have to have a need for it. I want it, but one can't justify $2,500 worth of rifle scopes. My wife would look at me and try to burn my soul out of my body. But if I did have an ATACR, I would have the Midas on my trainer. I like it that much. Here is another video of me talking about the scope that's currently on my CZ452. I'm going to make this into a possible smaller separate video, but probably only for my paid subscribers, just because I need to feed them something. Because if not, they get very hungry. And when they get hungry, well, you ever see what a hungry dog does to a bag of garbage? It rips it apart. But I'm talking about the wonderful SWFA fixed 10x rear focus that I've had on my CZ452 for the last 6 or so years. Once I mounted the SWFA 10X on top of my 452, they have been a married set ever since. I have never had the need to take it off because the SWFA fixed 10X served every purpose I had for the rifle. It was a trainer. It was a trainer for my Howa Mini Precision 223, which also ran an SWFA 10X, but a side focus. And it was the exact same style gun. It was a mini Mauser with 10-round magazines that both had the release in the front. Same exact stock, same exact scope. It made sense, and they both worked really, really well. I sold the Howa, though, because even though I had well over $1,000 in the gun itself, it shot only marginally better than my Ruger American Ranch, and it only shot marginally better with very specific types of ammunition, whereas my Ruger will literally eat anything you put through it and shoot most of it at around a minute, which for a 5.56 gun is very impressive. Anyway, I'm getting away from myself. The reason why I'm showcasing that gun is because I'm going to be taking off the SWFA 10X for this Midas TAC HD 4-16. That is right. I like it more in some ways than the SWFA 10X, which is one of my favorite scopes, especially for the $300 that they come in. They're Japanese made, they're lightweight, they're very robust, they track pretty good, they have wonderful glass, and they're very simple. Even though the Midas is more simple because it's got a zero stop and a capped windage, which is very nice. However, I now have a house and I have a little bit of property in my backyard, and I have groundhogs. And I don't like groundhogs. They destroy everything. And my neighbors have given me permission to shoot them when I see them. And there's this one guy that just walks through my backyard every morning and just looks at me, eating all of the vegetation in my backyard, staring me down at like the 15 to 20 yard mark. And then he sometimes goes out to about the 30 or 40 yard mark. And you know what, 30, 40 yards with a 10X isn't terrible, but inside that with a 10X, when you're trying to get a good pop shot off, is not ideal, even for me, who has thousands of rounds through that combination on the table before you. So I'm going to throw on the 4-16, which I already have. I've already zeroed it and I've played around with it a little bit. No, I haven't shot at any groundhogs yet, but that will be coming very soon. But the scope on this gun is almost a match made in heaven. I was really worried about the bolt clearing the magnification ring, but it clears perfectly fine, albeit I just can't have my thumb over the top of the bolt, but no need for me because I've been training to never do that with this particular rifle. So yes, I like this scope that much that I'm putting it on one of my go-to guns, and I'm going to shoot the ever-loving crap out of it. In fact, I plan on shooting a lot of matches with this setup because the rifle itself is extremely accurate. I have a bunch of 10-round mags for it, and the 4-16 on top I know tracks perfectly and has great glass, even out to 16, despite the fact it's got a very small exit pupil. I think I'm probably going to run a couple of NRL 22 PRS style matches in the near future. There are a couple of ranges that actually host some big events, so I'd love to try that out. And I would love to just run this gun with this optic because I think that this package right here that you see before you, ladies and gentlemen, is about as good as you can get for a lower to mid budget build. All in all, less than $1,000 on this rifle, and it really is something special, at least to me. So, with that all being said, what else can I say? The scope is fantastic. It's got some minor shortcomings, but overall, it left me quite impressed. And I'm going to have to hold on to this for a while because if I do get an ATACR 4-16, I'm going to make sure that I have one of these in my stable to use it as a trainer for the rest of my life. With that all being said, thank you very much for watching. And as always, I'll see you again next time. And a huge thank you to my Patreon providers and my Subscribe Star subscribers. Without you, this truly wouldn't be possible. If you'd like to support my channel but don't want to join either of those, I completely understand. But you could still help by using my affiliate links in the description below and or like, share, and subscribe as always. Again, thank you very much.